Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. You're settling in now, maybe already wrapped in a blanket, as your mind drifts upward toward the moon hanging quietly above Earth. It looks calm, almost decorative, like it's just there for ambiance. But you're about to ease into the idea that this pale, distant companion is constantly reaching out to you. Not in a dramatic sci-fi way, nothing tugging at your feet or pulling you out of bed, but with a steady, invisible influence that never really stops. You probably won't survive this with your eyes open. That's okay. That's kind of the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling extra cozy, leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something oddly comforting about imagining this same moon watching over all of you at once. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You imagine the moon not as a glowing disk, but as a massive object in motion, drifting along its orbit, never rushing, never stopping. A mainstream scientific fact to anchor you here is that the moon's gravity is strong enough to measurably pull on Earth, and water, being fluid and flexible, responds more easily than solid ground. That pull is always happening, even right now, as you breathe slowly and let your shoulders drop. What's strange is how subtle it feels. You don't notice gravity working on your glass of water or your morning coffee, yet across the planet, entire oceans are quietly reshaping themselves because of the moon's presence. The water nearest to the moon is drawn outward just a little, forming a gentle swell. On the opposite side of Earth, another swell forms too, a balancing act created by motion and gravity working together. You'll come back to that later, but for now, you simply sit with the idea that the sea is never truly still. Here's a quirky tidbit to let drift through your thoughts. The moon is slowly moving away from Earth, about the width of a fingernail each year. Laser reflectors left on the lunar surface during the Apollo missions proved it. That means the tides you know today are slightly different from the tides dinosaurs experienced, softer and slower, stretched across deeper time. As you relax further, you might picture ancient humans standing on shorelines, noticing the water rise and fall without knowing why. Historians still argue whether early coastal civilizations fully understood the moon's role in tides or if they simply accepted the rhythm as a gift from the gods. Either way, that steady pattern shaped fishing, travel, and even early calendars. The moon doesn't command the ocean with force, it persuades it. And as you lie there, breathing evenly, you begin to sense that same persuasion working on your thoughts, gently pulling them outward, loosening their edges, preparing you to drift a little farther from the day you just left behind. You remain right where you are, body heavy, thoughts light, as the idea of gravity continues to unfold around you. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, patient gravity that never announces itself. You don't feel the moon pulling on you, and that's part of what makes it so fascinating. Its influence is selective, almost polite, choosing water as its main conversational partner. A solid scientific fact to rest on here is that gravity affects everything with mass, but its visible effects depend on how easily something can move. The land beneath you is rigid, locked into place by rock and friction. The air above you is too thin, too scattered to respond in a noticeable way. But the oceans, vast, heavy, and fluid, are free to shift. They answer the moon's pull with slow motion rather than resistance. You imagine the surface of the ocean as a flexible skin, stretching slightly toward the moon. It's not a wave crashing or a splash, just a subtle rise, like a long breath taken by the planet itself. Yet the moon's gravity is strongest on the side of Earth closest to it, which makes that water lift a little higher than usual. It's enough to matter, but gentle enough to go unnoticed unless you're paying attention, or standing on a beach waiting for the tide to come in. There's a quirky detail here that often surprises people drifting into this topic for the first time. The moon doesn't actually pull water up as much as it allows water to pile up, because Earth itself is moving. Earth and moon orbit a shared center of mass, a quiet cosmic dance point floating in space. That motion creates a second bulge on the far side of the planet, even though it seems counterintuitive at first. It's like swinging a bucket of water in a circle and watching the water press outward evenly. As your breathing slows, you can imagine how long it took scientists to piece this together. Isaac Newton first described gravity mathematically in the 17th century, connecting the fall of an apple to the motion of the moon. That connection helped explain tides in a way humanity had never fully grasped before. Yet even with equations, the ocean kept some of its mystery. Historians still argue whether early astronomers truly believed gravity was an invisible force, or if they thought it was simply a property of motion that happened to work reliably. Either way, the idea that something unseen could move entire oceans was radical and a little unsettling. You let that thought soften. Invisible forces don't have to be threatening. Right now, gravity is holding you comfortably in place, keeping you grounded, supported. And the same force that keeps the moon in its orbit is keeping you exactly where you need to be, safe and still, while the oceans far away respond in their own slow, sleepy way. You drift a little deeper now, carried by the idea that Earth itself is not rigid, not fixed, but quietly responsive. The oceans, especially, behave like a living layer wrapped around the planet, always adjusting, always listening. As the moon's gravity pulls, the water doesn't rush, it yields, it stretches. It reshapes itself with remarkable patience. A well-established scientific fact settles in here. The ocean forms what scientists call tidal bulges, broad swells of water aligned roughly with the moon. These bulges are enormous in width, spanning entire ocean basins, but they are surprisingly shallow compared to the dramatic waves you might imagine. Most tides are measured in feet, not mountains of water sloshing around. That calm scale makes it easier to relax into the image. You picture Earth from space, blue and slow turning, with two gentle humps of water on opposite sides. The water closest to the moon is pulled outward most strongly, while the water on the far side responds to the balance of motion and gravity, creating a matching bulge. Between those bulges, water levels dip slightly, forming low tides. It's all smooth, continuous, and unhurried, no sharp edges anywhere. There's a quirky, lesser-known detail worth letting float through your thoughts. The solid Earth actually flexes a little too. The crust rises and falls by a few centimeters under tidal forces, something called earth tides. You can't feel it, and buildings don't sway. But the planet itself is subtly breathing in rhythm with the moon. Even rock, given enough force and time, knows how to bend. As you sink further into stillness, you imagine ancient shorelines responding to these movements long before anyone named them. Fishing villages would notice familiar rocks disappearing beneath the water and reappearing hours later. Historians still argue whether early observers believed the sea was alive and moving on its own, or whether they suspected some hidden connection to the sky above. That uncertainty adds softness to the picture. You don't need everything explained right now. The ocean doesn't ask why it moves, it simply responds. And in the same way, you don't need to analyze every thought drifting through your mind. You can let them stretch outward, then settle back again. Like water adjusting to a pull it trusts, the moon keeps circling, Earth keeps turning, the water keeps answering, and you, comfortably still, are part of that same system, quietly shaped by forces that don't rush and never forget their rhythm. You stay with the image of Earth wrapped in water, and now something gently counterintuitive drifts into focus. If the moon pulls on the ocean, you might expect just one high tide, directly beneath it. One obvious swell, one obvious rise. But that's not how the story unfolds, and letting that expectation dissolve feels surprisingly soothing. Here's the grounded scientific fact to anchor you. Earth experiences 2 high tides and 2 low tides each lunar day, which lasts about 24 hours and 50 minutes. One high tide forms on the side facing the moon, and another forms on the opposite side. And this happens because Earth and the moon orbit around a shared center of mass, and the ocean responds to both gravity and motion at once. You imagine Earth not as the center of the dance, but as a partner, gently circling a point in space with the moon. On the side closest to the moon, gravity pulls water outward. On the far side, the outward motion caused by Earth's rotation around that shared point allows water to bulge away from the planet's center. It's a balancing act, not a tug of war, and the result is symmetry rather than chaos. A quirky detail slips in here. If Earth were completely covered in water, with no continents at all, tides would be far more regular and predictable. They would flow smoothly around the globe like a slow planetary heartbeat. Instead, land gets in the way, breaking up the flow, us reshaping tides into the complex patterns we see today. Even so, the underlying two-bulge system remains quietly intact. As your mind slows, you can picture coastlines drifting through these bulges as Earth rotates. A shoreline doesn't move toward the tide, it simply turns into it. High tide arrives not because water rushes in from far away, but because the land rotates into a region where water is already slightly higher. That subtle shift reframes the entire experience of the tide coming in. Historians still argue whether early navigators understood that tides were tied to Earth's rotation rather than the ocean's motion alone. Many simply memorized local patterns, trusting experience more than theory, and that trust worked well enough to carry ships safely in and out of harbors for centuries. You let that trust settle into you now. And the idea that something can work perfectly without being fully understood feels comforting. Two high tides, not one. Balance instead of force. A reminder that complexity doesn't have to feel complicated. Sometimes it just quietly works while you rest. You continue drifting, and now your attention gently follows the moon itself. Not fixed in the sky, but always on the move. It doesn't rise and set at the same time each night, and the tides follow that wandering schedule. This slow shift is part of what gives the ocean its slightly off-kilter rhythm, a daily pattern that never quite repeats exactly the same way. A clear scientific fact settles in. The moon takes about 27.3 days to complete one orbit around Earth, and because Earth is also rotating, the moon appears to rise roughly 50 minutes later each day. The tides follow this timing. High tides arrive later each day, sliding forward like a calm appointment that refuses to be rushed. You imagine the moon gliding along its path, pulling the tidal bulges with it. They don't snap into place. They lag behind slightly, delayed by the friction of ocean basins and the drag of continents. This lag is important. It's part of why Earth slowly loses rotational energy and why the moon gradually drifts farther away. The system trades energy quietly without drama. Here's a quirky, almost poetic detail. Because of this tidal interaction, Earth's days are getting longer, by about 2 milliseconds per century. It's imperceptible to you, but real enough to measure. Long ago, a day on Earth lasted only about 22 hours. The planet has been slowing down just a little ever since the moon formed. As you relax further, you can picture time itself stretching, influenced by water sliding across the globe. Historians still argue whether ancient timekeeping systems accounted for this slow change in day length, or whether calendars were constantly adjusted without anyone fully understanding why. Either way, human schedules quietly bent around celestial mechanics. The moon's path isn't a perfect circle either. It's slightly elliptical, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. When it's closer, its gravitational pull is stronger, and tides rise a bit higher. When it's farther, the effect softens. This gentle variation adds texture to the rhythm, like a song played with subtle changes in volume. You don't need to track any of it consciously. The ocean does the remembering for you. It keeps time and water in motion. Yes, responding to a moon that never stops moving, never stops circling. And as your thoughts slow, you can let go of keeping track too, allowing the rhythm to carry you forward without effort. You stay suspended in that slow rhythm, and now the focus drifts back to Earth itself, quietly spinning beneath the water. You don't feel that spin, no wind rushing past, no sense of speed. But the planet is turning steadily, carrying continents, oceans, and you along for the ride. This motion is essential to how tides are experienced, especially from the calm perspective of a shoreline. A solid scientific fact anchors you here. Earth rotates once every 24 hours, and as it turns, any given coastline passes through both tidal bulges and the lower regions between them. This rotation is why most places experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day. And the water doesn't chase the land. The land simply rotates into different tidal zones. You imagine a quiet beach at night. The water seems to creep forward inch by inch, but what's really happening is Earth turning beneath a bulge that already exists. The ocean isn't rushing in from the horizon. It's rising locally, lifting around rocks, piers, and your imagined footprints in the sand. That realization softens the scene, making it feel less chaotic and more orderly. Here's a quirky detail that often slips under the radar. The highest tide doesn't usually happen exactly when the moon is overhead. Because of friction with the seafloor and the shape of ocean basins, the tidal bulge lags behind the moon's position. In some places, high tide can occur hours after the moon passes overhead. Nature rarely hits its cues perfectly on time, and that's okay. As your mind settles, you consider how long it took for this understanding to develop. Mariners once relied on tide tables passed down through experience, not equations. Historians still argue whether early sailors thought of tides as local quirks of the sea or as part of a global system driven by the sky. In practice, they simply learned to wait, to read the water, to move when the moment felt right. There's something deeply calming about that patience. Earth spins at its own pace. The ocean responds without urgency. And you, lying still, don't have to rush either. Just as coastlines pass predictably through high and low tides, your thoughts can pass through moments of activity and rest, without needing to hold on to any of them. The rotation continues, unsteady and reliable, and the water keeps rising and falling in response. You're carried along by the same turning world, gently, quietly, with nothing required of you at all. You remain in that slow turn of the planet, and now your attention drifts into the quieter spaces between the highs, the moments when the water pulls back, when the shoreline exhales. Low tide isn't an absence so much as a redistribution, a gentle rearranging of where the ocean chooses to rest for a while. A simple scientific fact settles in here. Low tide occurs in the regions between the two tidal bulges, where water has been drawn away toward the areas of higher gravitational influence. Nothing disappears. The water hasn't gone anywhere special. It has simply shifted, thinning out in one place so it can gather more fully in another. And you picture the shoreline at low tide, rocks exposed, seaweed glistening, tide pools quietly forming little worlds of their own. These pools aren't leftovers. They're temporary expressions of the larger system. As Earth continues to rotate, these same places will be submerged again, covered gently without resistance. There's a quirky detail worth savoring. Some of the most biologically diverse ecosystems on Earth exist specifically because of this rise and fall. Intertidal zones are shaped by stress. Organisms there endure drying air, crashing waves, and changing salinity. And yet, life thrives in that in-between space. The tide doesn't just move water, it creates opportunity. As your breathing slows further, you can imagine how puzzling low tide must have seemed to early observers. Water pulling away from land, revealing the seafloor, and then returning hours later as if nothing happened. Historians still argue whether ancient coastal cultures believed low tides were caused by the sea retreating in fear, obeying celestial commands, or simply resting before returning. That uncertainty feels gentle rather than frustrating. Low tide teaches patience. It reminds you that absence is temporary, that what pulls away will come back in its own time. Nothing is lost, just rearranged. You let that idea settle into you. Thoughts can pull back too, leaving quiet space behind. That space isn't empty, it's restful. Just like the exposed shoreline waiting calmly for the water's return, you don't need to fill every moment. You can rest in the in-between, trusting the rhythm to continue without your effort. The ocean never forgets its pattern. It thins here, gathers there, then reverses, all endlessly. And as you linger in this low, quiet moment, you feel how natural it is to let go, to allow space, to simply wait. You stay with that gentle patience, and now another presence drifts quietly into the picture. It's easy to forget, because the moon does such a good job on its own, but the sun is involved too. Softly, subtly, like a second hand resting on the same clock. Its influence doesn't overpower the moon's, but it never fully steps away either. A grounded scientific fact eases in here. The sun also exerts a gravitational pull on Earth's oceans. Even though it's vastly more massive than the moon, it's much farther away, so its tidal influence is weaker, about half as strong. Still, weaker doesn't mean unimportant. The sun gently stretches the same oceans, nudging the tides into slightly different shapes depending on its position. You imagine the Earth suspended between these two distant bodies, the moon close and familiar, the sun warm and constant. When the sun and moon line up, their gravitational pulls combine, subtly reinforcing one another. When they sit at right angles, their effects partially cancel out. It's not a battle, more like two musicians playing over the same slow melody. Here's a quirky detail to let drift through your thoughts. Without the sun's involvement, tides would be simpler but also less interesting. The slight variations in height, timing, and strength that coastal communities experience are partly thanks to the sun's steady interference. It adds texture to the rhythm, like a background harmony you don't consciously hear, but would miss if it were gone. As your mind softens, you consider how ancient sky watchers must have noticed these patterns without understanding the mechanics behind them. They saw certain full moons bring higher waters, certain quarters bring calmer shores. Historians still argue whether early astronomers connected these changes to the sun's position or whether they focused almost entirely on the moon, leaving the sun's role unspoken and unexplained. That gap in certainty feels fitting. Not every influence announces itself loudly. Some work best in the background, shaping outcomes quietly. The sun does that with tides, and maybe you do it too in your own small ways, affecting things without needing to be noticed. As Earth continues to turn, oceans responding to two distant poles at once, you feel the system deepen. It's no longer just one relationship, but a layered one. And somehow, instead of becoming complicated, it becomes more soothing. Multiple forces balanced, nothing rushed, everything moving together, slowly, predictably, and without asking anything from you at all. You remain suspended in that layered calm, and now the rhythm sharpens just a little. Not louder, not faster, just more defined. This is where the pattern gains its pulse, the repeating rise and softening that gives tides their names and their long, dependable beat. Stronger, weaker, then stronger again. A clear scientific fact settles gently into place. When the sun, moon, and Earth align during a full moon or new moon, their combined gravitational pull creates spring tides, which are higher high tides and lower low tides. When the sun and moon sit at right angles to Earth, and during the first and third quarter moons, neap tides occur, bringing gentler differences between high and low water. You imagine this alignment not as something dramatic snapping into place, but as a slow easing together. The moon and sun don't rush to line up, they drift there. When they do, the ocean stretches a little farther than usual, rising higher along shorelines, retreating more completely afterward. The word spring here doesn't mean the season. It comes from an old word meaning to leap or rise. Even that leap is unhurried. There's a quirky detail tucked inside this rhythm. Despite their name, spring tides happen twice every month, not once a year. New moon, full moon, again and again. Coastal communities have relied on this cycle for centuries, planning fishing, construction, and travel around water they knew would briefly reach farther than normal. As your thoughts slow, you imagine how confusing this must have been before modern understanding. Higher tides arriving predictably, but only at certain times of the lunar cycle. Historians still argue whether ancient observers believed spring tides were signs, warnings, or blessings, messages from the sky rather than outcomes of alignment and gravity. Neap tides, by contrast, are quiet. The water doesn't climb as high or pull back as far. The shoreline feels calmer, less dramatic. These are the tides that whisper rather than speak. They happen just as regularly, just as reliably, and often go unnoticed unless you're paying attention. You might notice how comforting that regularity feels. Strong, gentle, reach, release. A cycle that never asks to be managed. It simply happens on time, every time. The ocean doesn't worry about which tide is next. It trusts the sequence, and as you lie there, breathing evenly, you can borrow that trust. Some moments in life rise higher, pull more strongly. Others stay soft and close. Both are part of the same system. Both belong. The rhythm doesn't judge, it just continues, slowly carrying everything along. You stay with that steady rhythm, and now your awareness drifts sideways along the edges of continents. The moon's pull is the same everywhere, but the experience of tides is not. Some shorelines feel dramatic rises and long retreats, while others barely notice the water shifting at all. The difference isn't in the sky, it's in the shape of the earth below. A grounding scientific fact settles in. The height of tides depends heavily on coastline shape, yes, ocean depth, and the size of enclosed seas or bays. Narrow inlets, shallow waters, and funnel-shaped coastlines can amplify tides dramatically. Wide, deep ocean fronts tend to smooth them out. The moon pulls evenly, but the land answers in its own way. You imagine water flowing into a long bay, squeezed gently but persistently by geography. With nowhere else to go, it rises higher than it would along an open coast. This is why some places experience towering tidal ranges, while others see only subtle changes measured in inches. The ocean is the same ocean. It's just being shaped differently. Here's a quirky detail to let drift through your thoughts. In certain locations, tides can create tidal bores, waves that travel upriver against the current as the incoming tide forces water upstream. These slow-moving walls of water have been surfed, studied and quietly admired for centuries. They're not storms, they're tides wearing a different shape. As your mind relaxes, you think about how people living along these varied coasts adapted. Some built stilt houses, others timed harvests, crossings, and fishing trips to the hour. Historians still argue whether early coastal engineers fully understood why their local tides were so extreme, or whether they simply treated them as unique personalities of the sea. Quirks to be respected, not questioned. That idea feels calming. Not everything has to behave the same way to belong to the same system. The moon pulls, Earth responds, geography interprets, and the result is endless variation built on a single simple force. You let that settle in. Differences don't mean disorder. They're just local expressions of something universal. And just as shorelines experience tides differently, so do moments in your life. Some feel intense, others barely ripple. All are shaped by where you are, not by any failure of the rhythm itself. The water keeps moving, guided by gravity, shaped by land, patient in every form it takes. And you remain right here, comfortably still, letting the variety of the world exist without needing to resolve it. You stay with that idea of variation, and now the tide's influence stretches beyond water and stone, reaching into living things and long human memory. Tides don't just move oceans, they quietly shape behavior, timing, and survival. Life along the coast has always listened closely to this slow instruction from the moon. A well-established scientific fact settles in. Many marine organisms synchronize their behavior with tidal cycles. Crabs, on worms, fish, and even certain algae time feeding, spawning, and movement to high and low tides. Some species emerge only when the water retreats. Others wait for the safety of deeper coverage. The moon's motion becomes a biological clock written into instinct. You imagine a shoreline alive with subtle activity, creatures hiding as water pulls back, others appearing only in those brief windows of exposure. This rhythm has been repeating for hundreds of millions of years. Long before humans counted hours, the tides were already telling time. Here's a quirky detail that adds texture. Some animals appear to follow tidal rhythms even when removed from the ocean entirely. In laboratory settings, certain crabs continue to act as if tides are rising and falling, following an internal clock tuned to the moon rather than the sun. And it's as if the memory of the sea lingers inside them. As your breathing stays slow, your thoughts drift toward people who live by these same patterns. Coastal societies planned fishing trips, salt harvesting, and travel around tides. Entire ports were designed with tidal timing in mind. Historians still argue whether ancient civilizations understood tides as a lunar-driven system or whether they saw them as moods of the sea. Predictable? Yes, but ultimately alive. Either way, tides shaped trade routes, naval battles, and daily survival. A ship arriving at the wrong hour could be stranded. A harbor misunderstood could be dangerous. Knowledge of tides became quiet power, passed down through observation rather than theory. You let that sink in. The moon doesn't just pull water, it organizes life, slowly, patiently. Hunted without instruction, manuals, or explanations, just repetition, just rhythm. And here you are, a modern listener, benefiting from that same reliability without needing to think about it. The tide tables are printed. The harbors are mapped. The moon continues its work regardless. There's comfort in that continuity, in knowing that something so old still quietly holds the world together while you rest. You drift into the final stretch now, where everything you've been carrying gently gathers into a single, unhurried image. The moon continues its orbit. Earth continues its turn, and the tides keep time, not with numbers or alarms, but with water itself. Rising, falling, returning. A clock made not of gears but of gravity and motion. And a steady scientific fact rests here. Tidal cycles are so reliable that they can be predicted decades in advance. Long before satellites or computers, astronomers could calculate future tides using the moon's orbit and Earth's rotation. That reliability is rare in nature. Storms, surprise. Earthquakes arrive without warning, but tides arrive when promised. You imagine this watery clock ticking without sound. Each high tide a soft chime, each low tide a pause. The length of the day stretching ever so slightly over millions of years. The moon drifting outward, still keeping time even as the system slowly changes. Nothing breaks, nothing rushes. The rhythm adapts. There's a quirky detail worth holding gently. Some researchers have suggested that without the stabilizing presence of the moon, on Earth's rotation and climate might be far more chaotic. The tides, in a way, help smooth the planet's behavior over long spans of time. A distant companion, quietly keeping things orderly. As your thoughts slow even more, you reflect on how long humans have trusted this clock. Long before wristwatches, long before calendars, people watched the water. Historians still argue whether the earliest timekeeping was inspired more by the sun's daily movement or by the moon's control of the sea. Either way, tides offered something rare: dependability. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to calculate anything. The system works whether you're paying attention or not. The moon pulls, Earth responds, water moves, and your mind, like the ocean, can now follow that same pattern, loosening, settling, releasing. The pace softens now, unnoticeably, like the moment just before sleep fully takes over. You're no longer following ideas so much as floating alongside them. The moon is still there, doing what it has always done, tracing its path through the dark with no concern for observation. You imagine the ocean at night, not dramatic, not loud, just breathing, a slow lift against the shore, a gentle withdrawal, over and over. The sound blends into the background, like a fan humming softly, like distant wind through trees. Nothing sharp, nothing demanding. Your body feels heavier now, supported completely. Gravity holds you the same way it holds the oceans. Firm, constant, reassuring. There's nowhere you need to go. Nothing you need to fix or solve. The tides don't worry about being late. They don't try to hurry the moon along. They trust the motion. Thoughts drift in and out the same way. One rises, lingers briefly, then recedes without effort. You don't chase it. You don't follow. You let it pass, knowing another quiet moment will take its place. Somewhere far away, water is rising along a shoreline you can't see. Somewhere else, it's pulling back, revealing smooth stones and dark sand. The cycle continues perfectly without you needing to witness it. And as you rest here, breathing slow and even, you become part of that same rhythm. A small, peaceful pause in a system that has never stopped moving and never needed your attention to work. The moon keeps circling, the water keeps time. And you can finally rest,